and welcome to Spark Up Dance. My name's Brett, and today we're talking about floor contact. Now, because we're going to be primarily talking about the connection between the feet and the floor, we're going to go ahead and zoom into the floor right now. All right, so we're talking about floor contact. So when we're talking about floor contact, we're specifically talking about our feet in relation to the floor itself. So if I move my feet around the floor or if I step onto the floor, we're kind of talking about how this affects us in our partnership dances and in dancing in general. So the primary thing that we really want to focus on here for a second is a lot of times in classes when people are first starting, they'll start off just kind of stepping and walking around. But the main problem is that they'll pull up their feet into the air as they walk. Now, there's a couple problems with this. First off, I just want to say real quick, there are times where we do pull our feet up into the air to do things, and that's totally acceptable and fine and great for styling. But it's one of those things that once you know the rule, then you understand how to break it and when to break it, and when it's appropriate. What we want to do is we want to try to prevent this. The primary reason for this, I want you to imagine for a second that you're a blind person and that you're holding hands with your partner and that your partner is also blind. Every time that you pick up your foot, that's going to make them feel like whenever you go to do a weight change from one foot to another, they're almost blind and it feels very sudden. So until I actually step onto the floor, it's going to feel like there's nothing and then there's a step and then there's nothing and then there's a step. The other thing that's not as good about picking up the feet off the floor is the fact that it pulls you off balance temporarily, or it can. There are, of course, ways to compensate for all of these things, but as a general rule of thumb, this makes it so I have to work harder to stay on balance. So then what do we want to do? Well, instead, we want to do what's called toe brushing. And in toe brushing, what essentially this means is that anywhere that I move or step, I'm keeping my toes in constant contact with the floor, no matter where I'm moving. So you'll see here that my toes are constantly on the floor, where the rest of my foot technically is not. This makes it so that if you were still dancing with that blind person, then every time that you go to move your foot, there's going to be a little bit of friction, and they can actually feel that friction as you weight transfer and move around from foot to foot. Even if I'm in place, this is way more obvious to my partner physically than this is. The other thing that this does is it helps with balance. At any time, if I need to balance or something suddenly pulls on me, my toe is already on the floor and can react immediately. So I can constantly use the floor as a tool to stay on balance no matter what ends up happening. Versus if my foot is in the air, I get pulled and then I have to stomp onto it and then try to stabilize from there. So next, let's talk a little bit about some of the dances that we do this in. So really this happens in almost every dance. Swing and Latin in particular is going to have a lot of this. I'm going to go over kind of more the swing version first, and then we'll get to Latin, and then smooth, which is like your waltz and foxtrot. To begin with like swing-like actions, essentially we're going to be doing this thing called rolling our feet, as you've kind of noticed as I've walked around. And this happens for other dances too, like nightclub two-step, four-count hustle. A lot of dances use this action. The rolling of the feet is where I'm essentially picking up the heel of my foot, allowing my knee to bend until I get to the tip of the toe of the foot, and then I can roll down until my ball of my foot hits, the arch of my foot starts to come through, and then my heel lands. And that's essentially what I'm doing as I'm walking around, allowing my toes to slide across the floor. Now, this comes very naturally if you do this backwards. Forward, it's a little bit less natural, but you'll essentially want to point your foot every time that you go to take a step. When you go sideways, you'll want to point your foot here as well. So if I'm going sideways or if I'm crossing, that's how you'll want to essentially roll your feet, is to literally just come through. It's just to come up and down. Now, one thing that I want to talk about is that there is a big difference between a dance like Lindy Hop and a dance like West Coast Swing when it comes to foot rolling. The technique in and of itself is actually the same, but the speed of the music can be very different. If you see me dancing in a West Coast Swing, you'll notice that my feet at more medium to slow tempo songs will roll quite a bit. You'll see me roll a lot. However, if I'm dancing to a really fast song in West Coast, you're going to notice that my feet and my heels won't roll up nearly as high. Same thing for Lindy Hop, which is oftentimes even faster. When I come through in my Lindy, you're going to notice that it almost seems like my feet are flat. But if you were to slow this down, and I was to come back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you'll notice that I'm still rolling. I'm just not pulling my heel up as high. So I'd like to say that for like slower dances like in that have slower songs like in West Coast, I'm going to roll at least 60% of my full heel width. I might even go 100 if it's a super slow song. 1, 2, 3, and 4. However, most of the time I'm going to probably live around 60, and then for faster West Coast songs in like Lindy Hop, I'm going to be somewhere between 40 and 30% of a heel rise. Okay, this brings me to talking about Latin dances such as salsa or bachata or rumba or cha-cha. So in Latin dances, a lot of times they'll kind of do more of like a 50 to 40% foot roll that we're talking about, depending how fast the music is. So if I'm doing something like salsa, or if I'm coming off to the side in like a bachata step, you'll notice that I won't do a lot of rolling, even if I might have the time. So even if I'm dancing something like rumba and I step through here, you'll notice that as I step, that I'm going to have my foot flat very quickly, even though I do technically have the time to roll my feet. Why is that? That's to do with Cuban motion from the hips. You can roll your hip from like a press line here if you want, but either this press line where the heel stays in the air, or when the foot becomes flat, is where I'm then able to then roll my hips around. So in Latin, a lot of times we try to utilize plenty of Cuban hip action, and in order to do that, more often than not, we're going to need our feet 1 foot flat. So we'll usually roll through that foot very fast and then use the rest of the time to do some kind of Cuban motion, and then roll through the foot very fast and then use the rest of the time to do the Cuban motion, because I need to push off of the floor in order to get the Cuban motion moving and going, no matter if I'm doing international or rhythm style. So keep those things in mind. Even with dances like bachata, sometimes I'll use a press line foot here to do like a hip raise, for example, or in my bolero. So just keep in mind that in Latin, a lot of times we tend to do a smaller roll for that Cuban motion, regardless if we need it with the heel up or down. So that's why you don't see as much rolling in those dances like you would in swing dances or dances like nightclub two-step. Next, we have smooth, which is like your waltz, your foxtrot, your tango. I'm particularly going to be talking about waltz for a second. There's a lot of in-depth technique around how the feet contact the floor in dances like waltz or foxtrot. However, today we just mainly want to talk about how they stay in contact with the floor most often. You check out our other videos on our website at sparkupdance.com that are related to subjects such as bending and sending, poise, or just anything to do with the feet. Those are going to go into a lot more depth than this is. But essentially what's going to happen here is anytime that I want to go forward and backwards, I'm going to have my tip of my toe back, and I'm going to brush my foot all the way until it's flat, and I'm going to keep it flat for as long as I can until that toe has to peel off the floor. I'll do the same thing going back in the opposite direction, where I'm going to let my heel of my foot start leading until my foot is flat. It keeps brushing, brushing, brushing until I need to extend that ankle to go to the tip of my toe. So the idea here is whenever I move forward and backwards in a dance like Waltz or Foxtrot, I'm constantly brushing the floor to the point where you can hear the floor literally brushing. Very different than me picking up my feet and walking around. I especially need this in these dances because I need to communicate to my partner when I'm extending and when I'm moving in particular. Keep that in mind for those. In dances like Tango, there are techniques that are taught that you can actually pick your feet up into the air a little bit, and this is to actually help accelerate a more fast and staccato action in the feet. That's one of those things where you kind of break the rule because you want the result from picking up your feet. But generally speaking, we're going to be brushing the floor forward and back. If you go side to side, you kind of go back to the swing and Latin rule where we're just using the tip of the toe to step from side to side. Yeah? So that's everything that has to do with keeping your feet in contact with the floor. Remember that the main thing is that you're going to be rolling your feet with the tip of the toe gliding across the floor at all times. And whenever you're doing a smooth dance like Waltz or Foxtrot, you're going to be brushing the bottom of your feet as much as possible when you go forward and backwards, but the rest is going to be tip of toe. Last thing is, remember, in your Latin dances, you're going to usually roll more quickly in order to be able to utilize the floor in using your Cuban motion hip action. And in swing, we tend to exaggerate the foot rolling to eat up some of the time and movement in the dance. So that's floor contact. Remember it, it's going to help you a lot with balance, timing, and just in general making it so your partner can feel when you're changing from one foot to another. We'll see you next time.